We may expect more colleagues, but I am not 100% sure. There's stuff going on outside of council today. So I will call the St. Paul City Council Budget Committee to order. Welcome and good morning. We started out kind of ahead of the meeting with some sharing. That was good. And now we are rolling into the business portion of the meeting. I think today we will, this is it our second to last meeting, Holly, of budget presentations before we work to establish a final budget? Yep. So we're closing in. We're going to hear bonding report and our public works street plan. And so we have a lot to look forward to. I know these are things that we have been interested in hearing and especially in advance of our budget. So we will hear from Public Works, we'll hear from Finance, and then we will have Holly wrap us up and tell us where we are headed in the weeks ahead of us. We have until 11:30. We may not take our entire time, but if we start to get close, I'll let people know. So I will kick things over to you, Director Kershaw, to set the stage and get rolling this morning.
Yeah, thanks, Council President. We're looking forward to this conversation. What we will do, as you said, is walk through our 5-year plan in particular and some upcoming, capital projects and our efforts to get them funded. And then we will, Office of Financial Services will go through some of the debt issues and those financial issues. Leading the presentation will be Paul Kurtz, our city engineer. And so I'm going to turn it over to Paul, but we do have a full crew here to answer questions should they come up.
Wonderful. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Kurtz.
Thank you, Director Kershaw. Good morning, Council President Bren Moen, members of the City Council. Paul Kurtz from the Department of Public Works. We're going to see first off if technology works this morning. Hopefully it does. Let me get down here. Hopefully everybody's able to see my screen there.
Yep.
It works.
Good. Glad to hear it. So the presentation here this morning, as we have it titled, is 2022 Street Infrastructure and Debt Budget. Really what we certainly want to talk about street infrastructure projects, but mainly we want to share with council this morning our 5-year plan from the Department of Public Works and give you an advanced look at that, offer you the opportunity to ask questions about that plan. And we'll also talk about other infrastructure projects that we are working on in Public Works. As far as an agenda here this morning, you'll hear from 2 departments. One is Public Works, me, and then I'll turn it over when I'm done with my presentation over to OFS and Mr. Solomon for some presentation on budget and debt management. So for my portion here, I think an important place to start is to look back at 2021. I want to share just a few slides with council about some of the project work we did in 2021. We think that's important because last year council approved our 2021 through 2025 capital plan, and we just like to share some results of you approving that plan, give you a kind of a look at some of the projects we did this past year. But then we want to get into the new capital plan, which is from 2022 through 2026. This will ultimately be approved by City Council as part of the overall budget in early December. So we want to give you an advanced look at it here so you have the opportunity to review it and ask questions not only today, but in the days ahead here before it's approved in early December. We want to talk about other project priority and funding needs we have in the department that you've heard me present in the past. We'd like to update you on where we are with some of that, and then talk about potential funding sources being pursued by the department and by OFS. So that's my portion of this, and when we get to debt, I'll turn it over to Mike. So first off, just about 10 or so slides here to look at some of the 2021 project work we did this past year. This one that's on the screen happens to be a sidewalk reconstruction and infill project that we did over in Ward 6. And we included some ADA and pedestrian safety improvements along with that. This is a big project area bounded by Maryland, Case, Duluth, and Earl. So you can see some of the sidewalk work that we did throughout that area over there on the east side. So really, really nice project, turned out really well. Here's another slide showing some sidewalk work in that project. I like this slide because it shows what we can do sometimes with sidewalk construction. I know council often hears complaints from citizens about, boy, we'd really like to keep the trees in our neighborhood. We want the sidewalks, but do we have to take all the trees down? This just shows an example of some of the things we can do to kind of work around a tree. So we in Public Works want to preserve trees as much as anybody. So to the extent we can do that, we do. You can also see kind of in the foreground here, what we deal with sometimes with garage aprons and our alley aprons. So this is just a good example of some of the concrete project work we get into when we're dealing with sidewalks, but this one turned out really well. Here's some more sidewalk ADA improvements over by Phelan Lake Elementary. That's just good to have sidewalk connectivity for students that attend in Phelan Lake Elementary and can get to school safely. Switching it over to downtown, we've done a lot of project work downtown over the past 3 years. This is a look at some new sidewalk was installed this year on 5th Street, south side of 5th Street between Wabasha and Cedar. This was in really bad shape. Wish I had a before picture so you could see the after picture here, but this is a really nice improvement to the sidewalk in this area of downtown. Kind of associated with that is the street work we did, the Mill and Overlay project. This again is on 5th Street between Wabasha and Cedar. You can see the sidewalk work off to the right. A little further down 5th Street, more sidewalk work that was replaced, reconstructed, as well as some of the pavement that we put in place. This was just done, so that's why some of the bollards and stuff are in place there yet. So this is freshly done project. Looking over on 6th Street, coming up the hill from Cedar up to Wabasha. This is again just showing the pavement project we did. Looking over on 10th Street, where we have our Capital City Bikeway, as well as some of the street and sidewalk work we did in this area as part of the downtown improvements. This is as you exit off on 94 on 10th Street, you come around, and these are the sidewalk and Capital City Bikeway improvements we made at 10th and Dorothy Day Place. Moving out to Ward 3, we got some improvements along St. Paul Avenue. The roadway was in pretty bad shape. In conjunction with doing that mill and overlay work, we also took the opportunity to make some pedestrian safety improvements and some ADA improvements. So this is St. Paul Avenue at Davern. This is just a different look of that same intersection. So you can see we extended the island so people can safely cross here, and we certainly improved the street. Here we are down by St. Paul Avenue and West 7th. This was all beat up, but now we've got a brand new pavement out there, and you can see some of the island work we did, the concrete work on the island there. So here we are out at Pelham and Mississippi River Boulevard. We did some project work along Pelham this year to improve walkability, improve the sidewalk. Here you see a bike crossing to get from Pelham across over to the trail along MRB. So just wanted to highlight for you some of the great project work that got done this past year. And it was all a result of the city council approving our prior 5-year plan. So now let's look ahead to our new 5-year plan.
Mr. Kurtz, before you bounce forward, I just want to pause and say how much I appreciate that, taking a minute to look back at some of our successes here. We often talk about what's wrong and what we're solving and what we're doing next, and we are not great at stopping and like really acknowledging the work that's done. And the council played a role here, but you have a great team of engineers and a great staff that's out there working in all kinds of weather. And what I was noticing in the pictures you sent is that you cleaned up some messy stuff. Intersection at St. Paul and 7th is complicated and confusing for cars and peds and bikes, and the islands that you're adding, the on Davern, and these other locations, and especially up by the schools and Ward 6 they make a huge difference, and we're chipping away at it a little bit at a time, and it's hard to see these areas if they're not in your ward, or we tend to kind of travel the same paths around the city. So Just appreciate you and the work of the whole Public Works team and the design team that comes together to chip away at the infrastructure. And it feels like 2021 was a year where we made really big strides in some complicated areas. So just taking a pause to acknowledge that before you skip ahead to more problems.
Yeah, very good. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for those comments. And yeah, we're, like you said, we're chipping away, and it's about making steady infrastructure improvements throughout the city year to year. So we're happy to do that. So look ahead here. We're looking at the 2022 through 2026 capital plan from the Department of Public Works. This should look pretty familiar to council members, very similar to the look that you approved in prior years. We did do a couple of things from a formatting perspective that I'd point out to you. I think one of the things that's we thought was important was to get our city mill and overlay projects. Oops, excuse me. These right here on the front side of our page. So again, this all happens on an 11 by 17 sheet of paper. We have front and back. Certainly there's a lot more behind the scenes in terms of project description and scope and all of that, but this gives you a very high level look at what the projects are we're planning to do over the next 5 years. But we did move this mill and overlay to the front of the report. That way we capture all the street work here. So our St. Paul streets, our municipal state aid, which we do a lot of our arterial street work in, and then the mill and overlays we're planning to do in any given year. So that's one of the things. We moved that to the front, and then we moved our CIB projects, our capital improvement bond projects, to the back, because in Public Works we really don't get a lot of capital improvement bonds. Still important work that gets done with the money we do get, but we moved that to the back, and I'll show you that here in a moment. The other thing we did with respect to mill and overlays, we know pretty positively what we're going to do in 2022. You see Mississippi River Boulevard, Wheelock, and Summit. Very important projects that we're going to do next year. They're solid. We know we're going to do them. We look ahead to 23. We have Concordia and St. Anthony, the frontage roads to 94 that are in need of a lot of work. Those are programmed for 23. So, and we're pretty confident that we will be doing those in 23. Where it gets a little bit squishy is beyond that. And what we've done is we've taken our approach where we said, let's put all our potential mill and overlay project in kind of this box here. And these are the streets that we know are in pretty rough shape. We know there's a lot of traffic volume associated with them, and we know that we're spending some maintenance dollars trying to keep up with them. So these would be the list. This would be the list we would look at when we're saying, what's next for us in terms of mill and overlay? Not only in 24, 25, and 26, but what if we got additional funds and we could do more mill and overlay? This is the list we would go to move things up and prioritize things. The reason we lumped it like this is from year to year, streets come out of the winter and they're different. Some really fail a lot and they need a lot of attention. Others, well, they came through okay, so they're still on the list. We recognize them as a problem street, but they can, you know, they're not as in a dire need as some of the other ones. So we kind of want to take the opportunity to reevaluate them year to year. So that was kind of a formatting change we made. So it leaves it open in future years. So we're not putting something in 24 that then we feel kind of obligated that we have to do when in fact something else might take priority just based on condition. So that's the front side of the report.
Director Kurtz, just a quick, I don't know if this is a question or more of a statement, but one of the things that the council has been asking as part of the ARPA funds or the federal infrastructure dollars, if there's opportunities on some of these projects to get the planning in the can, so that if dollars show up, or just to get the, you know, the kind of the heavy front lifting out of the way. I would be remiss if I didn't hoot and holler about Wheelock Grotto residential phase 1 and phase 2, which I don't even know how far these have been delayed now. I think like 18 years, maybe 20 from the original plan. And I have to, like, this go back to this neighborhood year after year and like humbly submit that, yes, indeed, their project has been kicked back another year. But, can we start the work on some of these projects that are not particularly dynamic? I mean, we're going to be changing out the storm sewer. We're going to put in gutters. We're going to put in lighting. It's nothing, as dynamic as, some of these state aid roads and it doesn't need the squishiness of the mill and overlay and sidewalks. Like, can we get to work on the planning on those, give people a little bit of hope, or was the planning minimal? And we wait until we're 1 year out and start to work on it. It just feels like our RSVP program. I know we've talked about how we're not even through the first time around the horn, and we need to start going back for the second time around the horn. And it's harder and harder for these folks at the end of the list to feel like there's a light at the end of the proverbial tunnel. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, got it. Great question, Council President Brenmoen. My answer to that, let me take mill and overlay first. There's not really a whole lot of planning that needs to take place with mill and overlays. The fact that we have the roadways identified is the biggest hurdle for us. So, and we've done that. So when we talk about, is there additional money to do more mill and overlays? If we got additional money, we could quickly react to mill and overlay projects. Street reconstruction projects, on the other hand, particularly RSVP, they take some time, as you know, to develop because they're a lot bigger projects. We want to work through the community engagement process for all of these projects. So we really like about a year in advance at the bare minimum to know that, if we're going to do something next year, we want a full 12 months so we can really take advantage of all the things we need to do in that time frame, from collecting preliminary data and survey information to, again, engaging the community and actually getting the project fully designed. So if we know in a given year it's coming, we're fine. We're quite frankly, we're pretty good at RSVP because we've been doing it for a long time. So it's not anything we have to really do in advance. But what we do need to know in advance is, are we doing it or not? We know the list. We know that, there's 20 more to do. As you'll hear me say here in a little bit, we still have 20 areas of the 88 areas we started with citywide. And I know these folks have been waiting a long time for these improvements. And we really like to get these last 20 areas done. And it won't be a problem getting them done from an actual design standpoint, but we do have to get them programmed. And we know the priority order because we established that back when the RSVP was first established back in 1995. So we know what the order is. We could adjust that a little bit based on funding and the size of projects and things, but we'd like to stick with that order because again, neighborhoods are expecting this. And to the extent we can get additional resources to do that, we don't really gain anything by getting these projects ready in advance. I mean, we're going to be ready when we know the project's going to be in a given year, and we will program it and we will do the necessary things to get it designed and through the community. And so we really don't see any benefit. Plus, we're working on things, today that we might not do for a few years. And then it's how do you get paid for that? Those projects that we haven't quite done yet, but we've done all the legwork on them up front. So I know that's kind of a long answer to your question. We're ready. I mean, we're ready. We know what the next RSVPs are. We know we can do them. We know mill and overlays. We've got all of our projects identified, and I think that's the most important part to this whole thing. And so we're ready for that, and we're ready to take on those designs.
Okay. Ms. Naker has a hand up.
Thanks, Council President, and thanks, Mr. Kurtz. First of all, I just want to comment on something that maybe is just obvious, but to state it anyway, it makes such a difference, the work that your team does, seeing the pictures that you showed, as Council President Brenmoen said, and also just being in the neighborhoods where the work happens. It's public works are so noticeable, and they really change the way that people feel about their neighborhoods and their community as a whole. So I I think sometimes we think about it as just repairing potholes and making sure that everybody can get from place to place smoothly, but it actually has so much more of an impact in terms of how people just feel about the city. So that actually leads to my first question. I have two. One of them is in terms of streets getting on the 5-year capital plan. Can you talk about what considerations you take into account? I assume that pavement condition index, how bad they are, is one of them, and you mentioned that. But do we also think about things like equal treatment of all neighborhoods, so making sure that everybody is seeing something happening year to year, finishing up projects that have been there for a long time, as Council President Brenmoen asked about, or even things like working with MnDOT and other departments as they're doing work to make sure that we're either doing work at the same time, if that makes sense, or avoiding doing work at the same time, if that means it's going to cut off all roads into an area, for example. So that's one question, is just how things get on this list. And then I'm also wondering if you can talk a bit about the program buckets. I've wondered about this for a long time, but so traffic signals on arterials, the signalized intersection safety improvements, and then some of the things under local street, alley, sewer, and lighting. It seems like there are these just standing buckets, and I'm wondering how those are programmed, especially because I often get questions from constituents about, can we do something different with that traffic signal, or can we do something different with that crosswalk? And often the answer is we don't have the money for it, but I wonder how those dollars are allocated that are in those buckets.
Great. Council President Brenmoen, Councilmember Nanker, thanks for the question. I'll take the first one. I think you asked generally how things get on our 5-year plan. And I take a couple different approaches with that. One is when we did the RSVP, residential reconstruction areas, and we laid that whole program out back in 1995, we were trying to be diligent about making sure we were distributing these reconstruction areas throughout the city. So we weren't just highlighting a few wards, we were highlighting the whole city, and we were moving that reconstruction around from year to year. So that was one of the considerations we made when we first laid out the RSVP program. The arterial program reconstruction, really what we look at there, and it's the three main things. It's what's the PCI? What's the current condition of the roadway? How much traffic does it serve? And how much money are we spending on maintenance? And we look at that, we say, that's kind of our top main three priorities. We look at other things too, like is there lighting in this project area versus other project areas that already have lighting? Do we have curb and gutter already in the area? What's the likelihood of any redevelopment happening in the area? So there's all these kind of other ancillary things we look at when we're trying to kind of sort out what our arterial program looks like. But it really is around traffic volume, condition of the road, and how much money we are spending on maintenance are some of the really the key things we look at. We don't, necessarily look from ward to ward when we're dealing with that. It's really more, we're looking at just the technical piece of where do we need our resources to go based on what the roadway looks like and how many people it serves. So I kind of hope that answers that question a little bit for you. Now I'm trying to think of what your second question, and then also too, with respect to MnDOT projects and county projects that are taking place in St. Paul, we certainly coordinate with our county partners and our MnDOT partners on a very regular basis. They tell us the project work they're planning to do in St. Paul. We tell them the project work we're planning to do. To the degree we can coordinate on project efforts, we certainly do that. We have to participate on MnDOT projects based on their cost participation policies, same with the county. And we also have, we would request MnDOT and the county to participate in our projects if it's on their roadway or any of their infrastructure that they own. So lots of coordination happens between our three agencies for sure on all of this project work. So does that help?
It does. And the second question had to do with how we program the buckets.
Oh, yeah. So what we got mainly in our CIB area, which I'll show you in a minute on the back of the 5-year plan, is where we have what we call our annual capital programs. In fact, I'll put it up now. These things right up here. So we get small pots of money for ped bike and traffic safety improvements, improvements we want to make at signalized intersection, railroad crossing, safety improvements, stairway repair and replacement improvements, and then bicycle improvements. And what we do is we try to program these small amounts of money in this bucket so we can react to things that come up throughout the year. And we don't have to go back through the process then of getting the project approved and getting the budget approved for, again, things that come up within these categories that are pretty small, but we can handle. It might be a request that comes out of your office, for example, that, can we do this here and there? And, we can go and take a look, and if it's something we can do, this is the money we would use to make those improvements in these various areas. So that's an annual program. So that funding gets allocated pretty much every year and has for quite a few years now since I've been doing capital planning for the department. So it's really good because then it allows us to do some small things that sometimes make a big difference, and we don't have to find the budget for it and all of that. So that's both in our CIB, and we also program a little of that in our MSA on the front of the report. So, and down here in this area here. So we've got some MSA because a lot of these things happen on our MSA arterial roads. And then we have some CIB where things happen in residential areas that we want to address. So that's where those pots of money come from, and that's how we use them.
Thank you.
Good. So this is the back of the report. Again, we moved our capital improvement bond projects to the back. We're going to look here in a minute at 2022. I want to give you a good close-up look at what we're doing next year. But you can see that we have our capital improvement bonded projects. We also have our county funded projects, and the county and the work the county is going to do within the city are they're planning to do in their 5-year plan within the city. We try to highlight them on this capital plan, as well as the projects MnDOT is planning to do. And then where we have some federal funding for our projects, we like to identify that on our 5-year plan. And then ultimately our sewer utility work, some of the high level things our sewer utility is going to be focusing on over the next 5 years. The other thing we've added pretty recently is this map that shows the next 5 years. It depicts it on our map. So you can see in the upper right-hand corner, we have the 5 program years, and they're all color coded. So you can quickly look at the map and, see, what's happening. For example, we look up here and we say, okay, this is WELAC. What year is that happening? It's all green. There's a reconstruction piece and a mill and overlay piece. And if you go, oh, okay, that's going to happen next year in 2022. So, pink is in 2024 and so on. So this has proved to be very helpful for folks to take just a quick look at what's going on throughout the city, and then they can see what year it actually is happening. So 2022, I just want to give you a close-up view of what we got planned for next year, which is almost here already. And I want to show you this for 2 reasons. One is we have a really aggressive construction capital program for next year. It's a really pretty heavy construction lift for us. So I just want to highlight that for you, but then to give you a look at really what we are planning to do. You can see in our St. Paul Streets area, and that's really why we're here presenting you with the 5-year plan, is in order to use street reconstruction bonds for these St. Paul streets. We have to have a 5-year capital plan that's approved by City Council. So the projects we're planning to do next year are the Edgecombe road reconstruction. We got a piece of Wheelock, the last piece there from Edgerton to Arcade, and we've got the Grand Round associated with that. And then we have a couple of more minor projects, a roadway sidewalk project over on Curtis on the west side, and then up in Crocus Hill, we have an alley street improvement up there to make. So that's what we're going to be doing with street reconstruction bonds next year. From municipal state aid, Wabasha downtown. Anybody's been downtown knows Wabasha is in pretty bad shape. We're going to reconstruct that whole thing from Kellogg to 6th. We've got a project up in Ward 4 for Pryor Avenue to reconstruct Pryor from St. Anthony to University. Over in Ward 7, we got Battle Creek Road. We want to continue with the improvements over there that we made a couple of years ago from Lower Afton to Park Ridge, or from Upper Afton, I should say, to Park Ridge. Now we want to complete that from Park Ridge down to Lower Afton. We're going to continue our design work on Robert Street downtown. This is a major project that's coming in a future year. We need a lot of design time to get ready for that. We've got some west side intersection control enhancements. This is fiber optic cable between signalized intersections and some camera work that we'll be putting in over on the west side as part of that project, so we can better manage traffic at the traffic signals from the office environment. We've got a Pierce Butler Minnehaha intersection improvement. The county is continuing with the Lexington realignment that will happen from West 7th down to Shepherd Road. They also have a project up on White Bear Avenue near Larpenteur that they're working on, and we have a cost share in that. And then MnDOT's making some ADA improvements along the I-94 35E corridor that we have a cost share in. So that's
So these are municipal aids, state aids, ones that you're listing are just, there could be other county projects in St. Paul, but they're not ones that there's a cost sharing element.
It's rare where we don't have a cost sharing participation with a county project. So you can see the county projects are over here. Some of the things that the county is working on, you know all too well, the Rice Street, Maryland to Wheelock, and Pennsylvania to Maryland, for example. Those are projects the county is working on. We don't identify a cost share because we're not sure what it's going to be yet, but they are on those projects. So yeah, those are where we identify the county projects. We can use our municipal state aid funding to cover our cost share on a county project or a state project. It's called using our money off system. So that's something we can certainly do. And we do, as you can see here with the Lexington project and the White Bear project. These are cost shares on those projects. And we're using our municipal state aid on a county project. So
I'm glad to see that we're getting ahead on some design issues there, like you mentioned with Robert and other MSA projects. And I'm similarly with Ramsey County and the Rice Street project, especially given the infrastructure budget that's coming through the capital, the nation's capital. So because I'm hearing that it's possible that it could come through, be distributed out to the cities through municipal state aid, which would be great. I know we don't know those details yet, but I've continued, and I guess this is some, feeding off of something I said earlier, but it's like, if our stuff is designed, we're ready to go. If it's not, then we're stuck in design mode and the money goes flying past us. So I'm glad to see some of those more complex things are in the queue.
Yep, absolutely. We need some advanced time to get all the design elements worked out and the community engaged and all of that. And Rice Street is a big one, as is Robert Street. So yep, absolutely need to do some advanced design work on those. So. And then, of course, I already mentioned our 3 mill and overlay projects for next year. Really big projects: Mississippi River Boulevard from Randolph to Trunk Highway 5. We've got Wheelock. So we're going to reconstruct the piece of Wheelock from Edgerton to Arcade, as you can see. And then we want to do a mill and overlay through the park from Arcade over to Johnson Parkway. So again, keeping on improving the street and as well as the Grand Round. Just continuing our improvements on those two elements. And then Summit, which is in pretty bad shape. We're going to mill and overlay that from Lexington to Snelling. So, and then we've got our sidewalk work identified down here, so you can see that. And then over here we have our capital improvement bonds, safe routes to school. We got a Bruce Vento Elementary that we're going to be doing a lot of sidewalk infill work and making safe routes to school. And we have, in amongst all this other stuff, we have the Gold Line project actually kicking off next year, construction. And we have a piece of that, the $600,000 will be used to make some trail connections to the actual corridor where the Gold Line will be located and to do some lighting along the corridor. So that's a place where we use our capital improvement bonds to do that. The other two projects I would mention that are not on the list because they've been funded in prior years is our Griggs Sheffer Phase 2 residential reconstruction program. That is on for 2022. You don't see it on this list because it was actually identified for funding in 2021. But that has been moved forward to 2022. So that's a project that's a really big residential area that we're continuing to reconstruct. And then the other one I hear a lot about is the Kellogg 3rd Street Bridge. You know, when is that going to happen? I get that a lot from folks. And it's our anticipation that about a year from right now, we will be under contract with that project. And we will actually start demoing the bridge about this time next year through the winter months. And then we'll start reconstructing it in 2023. So just to give council an update on those couple of projects that are also part of our 2022 program. So a lot of work going on in 2022, and it's going to be upon us here in a short amount of time.
2 months. Mr. Kurtz, before you move ahead, Ms. Naker has a question and I may as well. Ms. Naker.
Thanks, Council President. Mr. Kurtz, just again, looking at the programs, the 600,000, I know I keep kind of coming back to this, but I heard you say it's sort of there if we need it. Projects come up throughout the year. I'm curious, are there current plans for those funds as it sits right now for any of them, looking specifically at the bike and ped improvements? And also wondering, you've divided up $600,000 into 5 different pools. I'm wondering, are those sacred allotments? And if you had a $250,000 bike ped project, you couldn't move from a different fund? Or I guess, is there a reason why, knowing that these are just kind of as needs come up and you don't have specific projects budgeted, you wouldn't just have that be a $600,000 flexible pool for any of these things that might come up throughout the year?
So Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Naker, I'd answer that 2 ways. One is whenever we are doing a reconstruction project in throughout the city, we're always looking at ways we can implement our capital city bikeway, as well as all the other bikeways that are identified in our citywide bike plan. So that's just normal practice for us. But even beyond that, we do have standalone bike infrastructure improvements we make year to year. We do have a listing of those. I don't have it readily available with me here today, but our planning section within Public Works keeps track of that. So some of the key critical connections we want to make in the bike network that aren't part of a reconstruction project, for example, that we think are really important to make from a safety standpoint and from a connectivity standpoint. This is the pot of money we would use for those kinds of things. And, of course, we have a whole list of those. So it's our intent every year to spend that money on bicycle infrastructure improvements. And to the extent we wouldn't spend it all in one year, it would move to the following year. And again, it's dedicated to bike and bicycle infrastructure improvements. So we wouldn't use it for anything else other than that. As you can imagine, we've got a lot of implementation left to go of our citywide bike plan. So, and we're undergoing a strategy right now to kind of update that plan. So it's something that we're constantly working on. We're constantly trying to build out, and we take every opportunity to do that, both from a reconstruction standpoint and then just a standalone bike project standpoint.
Thanks. And Mr. Kurtz, Ms. Naker has a hand back up. Follow up.
Thanks. Sorry, slow to the hand. Yeah, just thinking that this may be something we wanted to talk about a little bit more, maybe as a policy session, Council President. It just occurs to me that we made this really big shift in our CIB process this year to not, just have dollars sitting around that aren't maybe enough to do the project and bonding for them. And then, finally, after time, accumulating enough to be able to do the work. And I know our CIB committee, as I've said before, has expressed some concern about having so many of these pots that are reserved that they can't actually use for current needs in a given year when they're going through their decision making. So I wonder if maybe we could talk about just whether this is the best approach going forward to hold these pots of money this way.
Yeah, so many of them end up getting spent in Ward 2. We gotta take a look at that. Just kidding. Nope. Let's put it on the list. I think it's worth digging into. And I'll just say, I know that when we talk about the sidewalk and particularly the um, project for the Grand Round between the mill and overlay on Wheelock and Arlington or Arcade and Johnson Parkway, and just the continued work on the Grand Round. I know this is a place where the Public Works and Parks team up, but just this completing this section of the Grand Round from Edgerton Street to Phelan is a huge, huge thing, and I'm really excited about this. And I invite my counterparts in Ward 4 and 6 to, when this finally gets connected, we're got to do a slow roll of the Grand Round there. But right now, the path, like literally, you would bike right into a bench. It's in the middle of the path. So I'm looking forward to this connection and expecting that this will be a collaboration between the Parks Department, Public Works, and that continuing connection on the Grand Round, which is a wonderful way that we connect the northern part of our city. So I'm excited to see that as well.
Great, thank you. So just to kind of recap, these are the street reconstruction bonded projects we plan to do in 22. And again, that's why we're here to, we need to have a 5-year capital plan adopted and approved by City Council. So these are really the projects that will be funded with street reconstruction bonds next year. And so again, that's really why we're here presenting you the 5-year plan, so you can ultimately approve it early next month as part of the overall budget. I want to just quickly talk about some Public Works top 10 priority projects. These are things you've heard me talk about in the past, but I quickly want to go through them because these are projects that may already be identified on our 5-year plan, but may also still require some additional funding to get fully funded. So I want to walk through these with you real quickly. Eastbound Kellogg Boulevard Bridge at the River Center ramp. It's a major project. We do have some federal money already secured for the project. We have some local funding secured for the project, but we still need $26 million more to get that project fully funded. It's a complicated bridge structure. So we're looking constantly for ways outside of our city resources to get that project fully funded, and we'll talk about those here on the next slide. But I just wanted to point that out to you, that is a project that is very active, and we are actively pursuing that 26 million we still need for that project. Same kind of holds true for the Randolph Avenue Bridge near Shepherd Road. This is a bridge that leads down to the Xcel Energy plant. That one is in need of reconstruction as well. Same story. We've got some federal money already. We've got some local money programmed for that bridge, but we still need $9 million more. So we're looking for outside funding sources for that. Complete street strategy. City Council has heard me talk a couple of times about this. We really need to complete our residential street vitality paving program. We know we still have 20 areas remaining. It's important, and it will go a long ways towards improving our pavement condition index by getting these 20 areas completed. So we want to do that. We think it's essential that we begin a residential mill and overlay program. So those areas that were reconstructed back in the mid to late 90s are now 25 plus years old, and they're in need of a mill and overlay, so we can get the most life out of a street that we can, typically 50 to 60 years. And about at the halfway point is when you do a mill and overlay in order to preserve and extend the life of a street. So we really need to do that, go back through these areas that were done back in the mid to late 90s. Then we'd also like to expand our arterial collector mill and overlay program. You saw the 3 that we're doing this coming year in Summit, Wheelock, and Mississippi River Boulevard. But to the extent we could do more, we'd certainly like to. And so this is a $35 million program that we've kind of laid out. We know what the next residential areas are, so there's no planning really to be done with that. We understand those. We already know what the residential mill and overlay program will be in terms of project areas. So again, we're ready to go with that. And as you saw in the 5-year plan, we do have the arterial and collector streets that we would consider in the future already on the plan. So we're ready to go. We just, the $35 million is a big lift, but we're looking for other outside financing sources and funding sources for that money. And which we'll talk about here in a minute. Wabasha Street reconstruction and Capital City Bikeway. This is going to be done next year, as I talked about on the 5-year plan in 2022. That will be done from Kellogg to 6th Street. We'd really like to expand the project limits up to 7th Street so we can put in the Capital City Bikeway continuous from Kellogg all the way up to 7th Street along all those businesses in downtown. But we need $2.5 million more to expand the project. So again, we're looking for outside financing sources to help us bridge that gap and hopefully get to be able to construct this and reconstruct Wabasha and construct the Capital City Bikeway all the way to 7th Street. And then make interim improvements to the Capital City Bikeway beyond that, up to 10th over to St. Peter, and then St. Peter ultimately up to John Ireland. But again, that's $2.5 million ask. Sidewalk reconstruction and infill citywide. You saw early on the slides I showed you some of the great work that's going on with our sidewalk infrastructure citywide. We'd love to continue that, both from a reconstruction and infill standpoint. If we're going to reduce vehicle miles traveled by 2040, we'd certainly like to have a connected sidewalk so folks can get around as safely as possible. So we think sidewalk infrastructure is just a big need for us, and it really makes a difference. So we're looking for $4 million annually to really go at that hard citywide. A Green Alleys initiative. We think we can make some stormwater quality improvements, especially in our residential areas when we're doing reconstruct. It's hard to make those improvements up front where the street is because we have so many utilities in the way with sewers and water and communications and everything else. We'd like to take advantage of our alleys where we can maybe make some stormwater quality improvements, some infrastructure, put that in place in our alleys, and that would meet our watershed requirements. And while we're there, we can hopefully improve the condition of our alleys from a paving perspective and then a drainage perspective, because we hear a lot of complaints about our alleys citywide. We think $5 million annually gets us about 25 alleys every year. So we'd really like to find a way to get that initiative funded. The next two, Minnesota Street and Earl Street, they're both on our 5-year plan for reconstruction. I put them on our top 10 because if we could get outside funding for those two projects, that would free up the funding we currently have budgeted or tentatively budgeted for those two projects. That would free that up to do other things. And they're pretty big lifts at 20 million and 15 million. Same kind of holds true for the Grand Avenue and the 35E wall reconstruction from Dale Street down to the 35E ramp. We've got a roadway that's in pretty bad shape and a wall that leads down to I-35E that needs some repair. So that's another big lift. We'd like to look for outside financing funding sources for to try and get funded. And then lastly, our lower town flood wall system. We all know that sometimes in the spring of the year, anytime throughout the year really, but particularly in the springtime, we do get some flooding from the Mississippi into our lower town area. And we'd really like to build a flood wall system to prevent that from happening in the future. And now would be a good time just because the third Kellogg Bridge is going to be reconstructed and it's in kind of the same location. So this is kind of our top 10 that we'd really look to outside funding sources to help us with. These are some big dollar amounts. And these are kind of the things we're looking at for potential funding sources right now. Obviously, the federal infrastructure bill, which I'll talk more about here in a second, I've got pending on there. Pending means, it's been passed, but now we have to work through, or the Secretary of Transportation has to work through what the guidelines are for all of that funding and how it's going to be distributed to states and that kind of thing. So I know they're working on that, but we're going to be in line for some of that funding. Congressional earmarks, to the degree we can talk to our congressional folks to maybe get some projects put into some bills. If that's a thing, we certainly are willing to do that and able to do that. We've talked to Representative McCollum on some of that. So they're aware of our projects and our needs. So if we can get any earmark funding, that would be great. We've got a bonding year this year through the state legislation. So we will actually be taking legislators out to see our eastbound Kellogg Boulevard Bridge here in mid-November, to actually take them on a tour of that bridge and hope we can get our $26 million shortfall funded. So we're working those avenues through the legislature. We of course have the America Rescue Plans, the ARP funds, that we'll talk about here in a minute. And then there's always the idea of increasing local bonding, but there's the increase in the levy and the debt discussion we have to have with that as well. So let's talk just briefly about the infrastructure bill that was just passed. It's a $1.2 trillion bill. It was passed by the Senate in August, by the House just last Friday. And it's going to be a significant investment made in roads, bridges, water, broadband, and a whole host of other things here that I'll show you in a second. We are trying to position ourselves well to go after this funding. We've had conversations with Chair Zelli at the Met Council and his staff to say, hey, we have infrastructure needs in St. Paul. To the degree this money might funnel through Met Council, we want you aware of our needs. And that was a really good conversation with Chair Zelli and his staff. We're also communicating with Commissioner Kelleher at MnDOT and their staff to let them know typically federal funding funnels through the state. So we want to have conversations with them about our infrastructure needs here in St. Paul, and just positioning ourselves as best we can to get in line for any of that infrastructure funding that becomes available. So we're doing our part. I know there was a meeting with the administration and the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Transportation and his staff person. So again, we're just reaching out to everyone to say, hey, we have needs in St. Paul, and what do we need to do to best position ourselves to go after this funding? So won't talk a lot about the Build Back Better Act. That's 1.75 trillion, but that's in social and educational programs, and that's something different other than our infrastructure that we're talking about here this morning. These are kind of the categories that are in this infrastructure bill. And the amount of funding that's going to be allocated to all of these things. Obviously for us, roads and bridges is very important, as is transit, as is the electrical vehicle charging station, and reconnecting communities are all very important to us here in St. Paul, and particularly to Public Works. So these are the things that we would be applying for funding for when the guidelines come out on what that all looks like and what the requirements are going to be and all of that. The ARP funding, we know there's 166 million in the American Rescue Plan that's been given to the city of St. Paul. The bad news for us in Public Works is general infrastructure projects are not eligible to be funded by ARP. So that presents a problem for us because we have a lot of good infrastructure projects that we'd like to get funded, but it's really an eligibility problem for us in a lot of these instances for ARP. It's just they're not, capital infrastructure projects are just simply not eligible according to the guidelines, the federal guidelines that have come out. The exception to that, of course, is this last bullet where we talk about infrastructure spending is eligible to make necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband. So we are partnering with the water department to try and get a project put together. It's actually our Wheelock Grotto RSVP area, because that's the next residential area to be reconstructed. But we would partner, or we are partnering on a proposal, and our proposal with the water department to replace some water main and replace all the lead services in that area, get that funded with ARP money. To the extent we can then make our infrastructure improvements, our roadway, our sidewalk improvements, because in order to replace the pipes, of course, you have to dig up the roadway and dig up the sidewalk area in a lot of instances. So to the extent we can get ARP funding to kind of put back or improve that infrastructure that would be disturbed as part of putting in water facilities, improved water facilities, we've got a proposal in to do that. So we're partnering with our water department on that. So ARP is a tough one for eligibility for infrastructure, but we're trying to be as creative as we can to get whatever work we can do get done in partnering with water and putting a jobs program together with Ramsey County to do maybe some sidewalk work and get some folks trained on doing sidewalk work and moving apprentices into journeymans in that overall job market. So we're working with the county on that proposal. And then
Director Kurtz, I know Ms. Nickers had her hand up and I'm afraid it was the slide before, but I just want to make sure that she has a chance to ask that question. Ms. Nicker.
Thanks, Council President. It was on the slide before, but I, believe it or not, had a new question on the current slide. So I'm just going to stick with the current slide. So thanks, Mr. Kurtz. I'm curious two things. One, I appreciate the flexibility and the creativity about using ARP dollars for roads to the extent that we can, and your description of the program that would replace lead pipes or do other sewer work and water work and then replace the road above, I think is exactly what many of us have been talking about as a way to use those dollars. So my first question is when we can expect to see that plan or that proposal. And then secondly, we kind of skipped over the third bullet point, but it seems important here that infrastructure is eligible under the provision of government services area. And I guess I'm curious if I'm reading this right, that $40 million in 2020 was our revenue loss and could be available under ARP dollars for infrastructure. Is that right?
Okay, so I'm going to ask someone else on the meeting here to help me with that one, because I'm not quite sure about that. So I don't know if there's anybody from OFS or.
It looks like Mr. Kershaw has a hand up. So let's go with that for now.
Well, and I will answer this in conjunction with Director McCarthy. The deputy mayor is the answer to your question, council member, is the deputy mayor convenes a group that meets weekly to look across the city at all of these infrastructure projects. And the whole goal of that is to line up the right funding source with that project as quickly as we can. I do think the short answer to your question about when is we need to see these federal regulations. If Paul could go back a slide, you'll see in there that there's $55 billion for water. So that may be a fantastic opportunity when we see those regulations to do all of this work and not have to use ARPA funds on it, or maybe we use both. What we want to do to maximize both the volume of funds that we get in St. Paul and that in order to maximize the volume, we've got to line them up with the right sources. So we are already, as Paul Kurtz said, on some of these projects, talking with the Deputy Assistant Secretary, talking with Chair Zelli, talking with Commissioner Kelleher about the projects we have to be ready in the queue. And then, as I mentioned before, the Deputy Mayor convenes a meeting across all departments to make sure that these projects are ready and coordinated when we know more about potential funding. And Director McCarthy can provide a little bit more there. But I think these regulations on this bill will be key on the infrastructure question.
I appreciate that. And I clearly want to make sure we use the right flavor of money for the right project and keep our most flexible dollars available. I am still curious, though. I just would like to better understand what our capacity is. I mean, is that third bullet point about general infrastructure under ARP, is that accurate to say that 40 million could be used on general infrastructure?
Council President Brendmo and Councilmember Naker, it is accurate to say that up to that amount could be used for anything that falls under that provision of government services bucket, including capital. The challenge there is everything that doesn't meet any other ARP eligibility rules also needs to fall under that bucket. And so we've already allocated, for example, the 1.7 million for the River Center ramp repairs that we've already allocated had to fall under that. And there's other things, and it's directly tied to the last revenue. So some of the things that we did to shore up, places where we had revenue gaps also have to come out of that bucket. We're working on trying to push as many things as we can out of that $40 million because it is the last revenue number, because it is the most flexible source that we have. And as Director Kershaw noted, that's where some of those team meetings can really help us move as many things as we can to other people's funding first to free up as much of that 40 million. So we're working on kind of estimates on what we think is available there, and happy to continue to update the council as we get better information on what is available within that 40 million. Because it's capital and everything else that we could possibly need that doesn't fit another specific category.
If I could give a fun example to that, we had this meeting set up with the Deputy Assistant Secretary Small last week. And our plan in that meeting was to talk about the RAISE grant, which is a planning grant for the historic Rondo neighborhood to do community engagement around future infrastructure spending. They were there to talk about the eastbound Kellogg Boulevard Bridge. And because Director Goodman was in on the call as well, we went from the RAISE grant to the eastbound Kellogg Boulevard Bridge to the impact of our housing work in this area. So the fact that we're all there together working on these projects made that half an hour call, it went 10 minutes long just because it was going so well. And we were all ready to talk about all those projects simultaneously as a way of being ready for the, to pitch them on these really big, important funding projects.
That's great. And I earlier was just going to point out that I appreciated even having the Build Back Better information up there. So it's sort of like, there's even this pot of money. So it's like recognizing that there's definitely value in making sure that we use the appropriate resources. And I do really want to recognize the work that's been happening with administration and the departments to get everything in the kitchen sink out there so we know which pieces will fit best into the puzzle that we have. It is good to, I really do appreciate how we've infilled and then, prioritized where we'd like to focus those dollars should they become available. So I appreciate that clarification as well.
All right, so that's all I had from the Department of Public Works. I think I'll turn it over to Mr. Solomon now from OFS to talk a little bit about debt management. Mike, do you want me to just continue on, or should I stop sharing and you can start?
Yeah, Mr. Kurtz, if you don't mind continuing to run the slides, that would be great.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, great. So thank you, Council President Brenmo and council members. Mike Solomon from the Office of Financial Services, here with just a few short slides on debt management, given the context of this conversation with the street infrastructure and all of those exciting external sources. We just have a few short slides to run through on debt and how it feeds into that strategy that Mr. Kurtz talked about. So here shown before you is the city's outstanding debt portfolio. Nearly $500 million of outstanding debt managed here in OFS Treasury. That work is led by the city's debt manager, Sarah Brown. You can see the different categories that we have here. General obligation bonds are, of course, those that are secured and typically repaid from the property tax levy. So those are the most pertinent to this conversation, with the general obligation capital improvement bonds in that first line, and the general obligation special street reconstruction bonds falling into that special assessment category. So those are our two largest property tax backed debt items. And you can see some of the revenue bonds we use below to finance other projects, the water utilities capital plan, the sewer utilities capital plan, and then the sales tax credit that has supported our River Center and economic development bonding in the past. You can go to the next slide. All of that outstanding debt has annual payments that are due. And so this is our annual general obligation debt service repayment budget. You can see that we're trying to manage this within this band that we've shown here. But with the bonds that we have already sold and those that we plan to sell, to continue funding the capital improvement budget at that average of $11 million annually, and the street construction budget in the amount of $12.5 million annually. We still have this kind of increase that's out there in 2026 and 2027. We've been managing that increase by spending down some of our fund balance that we have within the debt fund, as well as some other more creative revenues. But as we've discussed with the council over the past few years, it is now time to get some ongoing revenues into this fund to match our debt service expenditures. And we've been primarily funding that through requested levy increases. If you go to the next slide. So here's how we kind of manage that model. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know if you want to pause for a question.
Yeah, it looks like there is a question, and Ms. Naker.
Thanks, Council President. Mr. Solomon, why is that? Why does the line go up in the 2030s? I guess it seems like we're always talking about how we always bond exactly the same amount for capital and never more, and it has never changed. So I'm just wondering, can you explain the mechanics of like why all of a sudden it starts to tick up?
Yeah, thank you, Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Naker for the question. Primarily two reasons for that. The first was in 2006, we changed the amortization of our street debt from 10-year repayment to 20-year repayment. And so, that was a short-term decision that we only feel the full brunt of after a full 20 years of 20-year debt issuances. And so that's why we kind of see the peak of that in the mid-2020s. And then beyond that is during the last large federal stimulus act, in the Obama years, we had the ability to sell Build America bonds wherein the interest would be subsidized by the federal government. And so we used the opportunity to do that to finance some larger projects. I believe it is the Arlington Hills Community Center. It is the Highland and Como pools, as well as the library component to Arlington Hills. So those debt issuances, because the interest was subsidized by the federal government, were kind of they were structured to have kind of these longer repayment terms. And so we are just now getting to the point where we really need to kind of fund those repayments at this point. So those are the two drivers.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I guess just to continue playing off that, that's one of the reasons that you see me and Ms. Brown in front of you more often saying, if we're going to make these increased investments in debt, we need to really line up those revenues today so we can kind of avoid those tails in the future. And one of the best tools we have to do that is this debt model. It's actually a longer term model. Again, Sarah Brown, our debt manager, runs this. A lot of variables here, but this is kind of a high level summary. On top, you have our spending, which includes repayment of principal and interest on the bonds we've already issued. It includes our projected debt service on the bonds that we plan to issue into the future. And then we have some administration and other line items there that lead to a budget of about $50 million that does have some annual growth, as we saw in that last slide. Looking at the financing side, for $50 million, really only 19.6 of that is coming from the property tax budget. And that's pretty unusual in city government. Typically property taxes repay property tax debt, but we've found these other revenue sources that you see there, as well as that use of fund balance as an important tool to kind of repay this debt. And as I stated, you can see we're really aggressively spending down that use of fund balance. It really becomes depleted to, what we think are the recommended levels around the mid 2020s. And so that really is one of the drivers for the need to find property tax or other, ideally ongoing revenues to fund the repayment of our debt.
Ms. Naker.
Thanks, Council President. It's helpful to see the relatively small proportion of the property tax budget in this financing plan. And I note the 1% levy increase. I think that's roughly what it is per year to cover that. Can you just talk about, given how small that levy increase is out of the total financing, what is that other revenue line, and where do those sources come from?
Sure. Thank you, Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Naker. A good example of that would be the $3.5 million of sales tax that we see transferred through the STAR budget. Additionally, there's that $1.5 million that supports our fleet vehicle lease repayment in that STAR budget. Another example would be a repayment we have from the sewer utility. Back when we did the sewer separation in the 80s, the GO debt fund that we manage helps support the sewer fund. And so there's a tool built in to repay that. And that revenue source is one of those ones that does go away as it's completed, I think, in the next few years here. So those are just a couple examples. Interest earnings would be another one.
So just as a quick follow-up, Council President, if we were to upwardly adjust the amount, say from our sales tax revenue that we use for debt financing, I know we never like to see it on the star slides, but maybe we'd like to see it on this slide. Would that affect the property tax increase we need to see?
Yeah, Council President Bremont, Councilmember Naker, that's certainly one of the tools that could be added to this. We'd want to relook at our eligibility and compliance things, but yeah, I think that would be a good example of a strategy that would work.
Thank you.
And yeah, so just to really make it clear here, this is the ongoing debt levy need, again, just to finance the bonds we've already sold, as well as those that we plan to sell, which, on average is $11 million of capital improvement bonds and $12.5 million of street bonds each year. So expect to see us annually. As Councilmember Naker noted, I think in the grand scheme of the debt budget, this is a relatively small ask and an important one to get those ongoing revenues in to support our debt repayment. And eventually, when we get to those 2030s, we do get to a point where we are balanced and, would eventually then have kind of debt capacity would be the concept of once this fund is kind of fully funded with property taxes or other ongoing revenues. One last slide on debt here. I know Director McCarthy in the capital improvement budget presentation spoke a bit to the concept of cash flow financing and how we're doing that, utilizing that tool to fund an accelerated capital improvement budget. So we just wanted to show the council how we're tracking that. That concept of cash flow borrowing is already in play. And you can see listed here some good examples of that are the longer term Ford Highland Bridge Parks project, and then some of those annual programs that were noted earlier as kind of maybe not having annual expenditures each year. And so that's one of the efficiencies we can realize through our cash flow borrowing model is, departments have these authorized budgets that they can go out and spend, but we in Treasury are not going to go out and bond ahead of time for those projects. We are going to work to be more closely aligned with the departments and programs to align our borrowing with their actual cash expenditures. But again, no impact on budgets, solely a cash flow tool we're hoping to gain some efficiency from. So this is something we'll have in front of you as we track those amounts annually. And this, of course, ties back to our debt modeling to ensure we have the funds to repay the bonds when issued. So that's the end of the slides I really have, and definitely happy to take any questions.
Mike, just FYI, there's supposed to be something that says thank you at the end or questions with a question mark, just so you know. I don't know who made this PowerPoint. Just kidding. Okay, so Mr. Kirsch, oh no, Ms. Naker has a question.
Thanks, Council President. Thanks, Mr. Solomon. I love when the question slide comes up at the end and then we've been asking questions the entire time and we're like a half hour over. I'm just curious if the debt model that you've presented assumes any new debt, or another way to say that, do we have any wiggle room? Or if we take on new debt, do we blow this out of the water and we're stuck finding new ways to finance that?
Council President Bremont and Councilmember Naker, it has that capability, right? So currently the numbers you see before you do not plan on any increased debt, but of course, myself and Ms. Brown and Treasury are running numbers throughout the years to answer questions and model what different situations might look like. I would just again point to that current need just to get to, again, structural balance in this fund as kind of one of the reasons that the model in front of you doesn't include any increased debt.
Thanks.
Mr. Kershaw.
Yeah, in the earlier slides, I'll just make a point, Paul, you don't have to go back. I forgot to mention a couple of key partners in this. I mean, you as council are key partners in this larger fundraising. I mean, it is fundraising for the infrastructure, but our congressional representatives have been phenomenal here. So we've been working with Representative McCollum's office, both directly with the congressperson, with her staff at multiple levels, the same with Senator Smith and Senator Klobuchar. And they have been working on, the same list that Paul showed you to advocate at the departmental level, both within bills whenever possible. Representative McCollum got something for originally, we'll see what happens, for the 3rd and Kellogg Bridge in an earmark. We'll see what happens. But they have been key partners with us in making an appeal and building the case for these both specific federal funds and then the new infrastructure bill. That I just wanted to make sure I highlighted how much time we've spent working with them.
Thanks, Mr. Kershaw. Mr. Tolbert.
Yeah, just one thing I wanted to put out here, and I think I've talked to some folks about this over the time, but we're looking at how we can increase our ability to finance more street work done into the future. And one of the things that we've been looking at is that the TIF that will be coming off will no longer be captured in the downtown district. And I believe, and Mr. McCarthy, or Mr. Solomon can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in 2024 timeline. And one of the things I know that we've talked about in conversations is building up for that 2024 capture and dedicating it to the road construction, to the construction that we need to do. Is that correct? And could you talk a little bit about what we expect to see and what, if we did had levy capture that, how much we could increase the public works budget by, with the thought of setting up a ramp to be ready for that? Because I know we need planning time to be able to implement it.
I can take that, Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Tolbert. Yep, that's accurate. The Minnesota Events District that does encompass portions of downtown would be available for the tax base, I believe, in 2024. I don't have those exact numbers in front of me, but given that it is downtown, it is a significant amount of tax base that could absorb increased tax levy. Of course, as we sit here in 2021, there are different valuation metrics changes that could happen before that time. And we, of course, split that tax capacity 3 ways with the county and school district. But we can certainly get some numbers back and model that for you.
Yeah, I think that would make sense. I think that's something, because we've often kind of the chicken or egg conversation with investing more into public works of, well, if we invest more, but we got to have the projects ready and this and that might be a really good target because it gives us the necessary time. Obviously, we can maybe gap fund that over the next couple of years with the ARP and infrastructure budget, but for long-term financing, because this infrastructure cost won't stop, I suspect even after infrastructure and ARP runs out. It could be a good goal and kind of target for public works and the engineering staff who has to do the pre-work for any projects to aim for. So I think any information you could get back to us on that would be really good. I think it would kind of end that catch-22 and give us a target.
I look forward to hearing that update as well. I think it's an interesting concept, and I think it kind of answers the question of like, why are we using this tool? And there's the but-for test, but then it comes online. And if there's a way that we can say, look, we did this investment, we have this resource coming back online, and it is going to be allocated to this specific purpose. It really, by using that way of capturing it and allocating the resource specifically to a need in the city, I think helps answer some of those kind of questions that happen on the front end. It's like, yeah, this is what happens. So I'll look forward to hearing, maybe it's a non-starter, maybe it's a big deal, but I appreciate the thinking there, Councilmember Tolbert, and the follow-up from finance. There's not a questions or whatever thing, so I don't even know what to do. Looking to see if there's any other questions from my colleagues, from city staff. Anyone have more before we wrap it up here today? Great. Looks like no. So, Mr. Kershaw, wrap it up.
I know. I just want to thank, Paul as leading the engineering team and the amazing engineers and staff who have put all this work together. So if you have questions on any individual project, we're happy to talk about it and happy to follow up. You can tell we do like talking about this work. So no more questions and thanks.
Well, I hope you can tell that you're in good company because we like talking about this stuff too. So it's fun. It's interesting for us, and it's also putting, as I was saying earlier, kind of the pieces together in the puzzle. So this is a very actually quite informative and very important presentation here today as it relates to our ongoing work in the city, but also, wow, I mean, the president, Biden, is really making good on his promises to deliver funding to the cities. And I was reading an article this morning, or probably just the summary of the article, if I'm being honest, in the New York Times, just about how behind we are in our infrastructure as a nation, and that how that is taxing on us, and how we the amount of infrastructure work we need to catch up to our European counterparts is pretty staggering. And this is a Kickstarter. So I think it's as a big deal, and it means that your work is cut out for you going forward. But I feel like we're actually in really good shape. We're ready to catch the dollars and do the work. So I appreciate the professionalism, the presentation, and the teamwork here. We really do appreciate you and look forward to pretty exciting stuff in the years ahead. Thank you much. We will switch gears over to our fearless leader, Holly Houston, in the budget realm, and hear what's in front of us and what is our path here to the finish line.
Thank you, Council President Brenmoen. Good morning, council members. So next week on November 17th, we will be hearing from the fire department on the social worker response program, and also from a combination of some staff. I believe the Office of Financial Services primarily will be there to present on the low income homeowner support program. That is the official title. I think some of us have heard of it as the property tax relief program, but we'll hear a presentation on that. Next week, property tax estimates will be mailed to homeowners. And then within that estimate will be notification of the Truth in Taxation meeting held on December 1st at 6 p.m. I'm also wrapping up just what survey and what information we've heard from our community members. We've received over 280 responses to our survey this year. That's almost a 100% increase versus last year. So I'll be getting you that information. We have some nice graphs as well as just some textual feedback. And then finally, the council is just working on narrowing in on their priorities and changes for the 2022 budget as we prepare to adopt a budget December 8th. That's what I got. Thank you all for your hard work and thoughtful comments and participation in this process. I appreciate all of you.
Thank you, Holly. And I will just two quick things. One is that the council has been working to establish where it is in alignment on changes, and I'm working to present a budget we can pass to the mayor's office. And I think we're close. We should be circling back through Holly this week with kind of a final draft of that, and then we'll publish that and talk to the administration about where we think that's going to land. And then second of all, this is kind of a housekeeping item, but we have throughout COVID made an adjustment in our council schedule. We hear legislative hearings every week, and we have gone away from the 3:30 meeting, 5:30 public hearing model, and just run through our council meeting starting at 3:30. And we will continue to do that when we are back in council chambers beginning January 3rd, 2022. But I want to also just be clear that, and it's partially because it's hard to establish what are work hours, when is after work, what is convenient for people to come downtown. We are offering a hybrid model for folks to participate in our public hearings, so the timing need has shifted somewhat. That said, things like truth in taxation hearing or any large public hearing where we expect to see a larger crowd, we will establish a special public hearing probably at our typical council time of 5:30, and those would be announced as we came to them. But our intention is to continue with our 3:30 meeting format when we go into 2022, and just establish special public hearings for larger agenda items that have large public interest, and we want to make sure that folks have an opportunity to come in, hear what other people have to say, share their piece, but that will be on a case-by-case basis as opposed to an every other week model. as we have in the past. So truth and taxation will be an interesting sort of hybrid model this year. And then I have to say, so looking forward to being back in our beautiful council chambers, eye to eye, face to face, sanding off the rough edges and getting back to work and in with the council team. So little change there, but we are looking forward to that truth and taxation, and then a final budget in a very timely fashion in the beginning of December. And then we will take a quick breath and head back to work for 2022. All right. Anything else we should know before we adjourn this morning? Looks like no. All right. Thanks, folks. We'll see you later. We have nothing else to come before us. We are adjourned.